Hello and welcome to Books and Beyond. I'm Jimmy Bennett, your host. Um, Books and Beyond is a show where I hope to help creative people personify their aspirations. And if you wish to be on this show and show off your creative talents, no matter what they are, anything from the quill to quilting, you can contact me at the email address you'll see at the end of the show, and be love to have you on. In this period of time, COVID, things have been really tough for everybody. I can't get out as much as I'd like and meet and greet and see how everybody's doing. And I know everybody's been isolated and hard to actually show off your talents. So, please contact me and let me try to help you get the word out. I want to caution everybody, I know everybody tells you how tough this period's been and how hard it is and everything, but you have to be careful. I myself contracted COVID. I'm just getting over it now. I'm just at the end of my quarantine period. And I was as careful as I could be. I've been isolating and trying to do all the right things, but it's out there, it's everywhere. And, in another couple of months, hopefully we'll be vaccinated and we'll all be able to get back out there and do some events and show our stuff. But until then, please be careful, be safe. So that being said, one of my favorite people in the world, Harriet Grayson, will be my guest today. Harriet has written 3 books under the name Anastasia Goodman: the Sacha Perlov novels, Loose Ends, Death and Diamonds, and The Terrorist. All great books. I highly recommend them. But now she has stepped out of her comfort zone, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word. And she's written a book called Rockaway Riptides under her own name. Me and Harriet have done a lot of events together, and we are both members of Kappa and have known each other for a while. One of my favorite authors. Harriet, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. It's such a pleasure to be here. And, take good care. I mean, you're a good example of why one has to be cautious during these crazy times. And I have to say that during the COVID crisis, because I didn't go out much at all, I decided, what does a writer do when they have time on their hands? You go and you write. And I decided to write under my own name, Harriet Goodman Grayson, because I got caught up in all the crazy stuff going on. And it reminded me very much of what life was growing up in the 1960s, when we really did have a lot of turbulence. We had protests against the Vietnam War. There were civil unrest in terms of racial unrest. I mean, the problems we have now are not new. We've had them before, and it got me thinking, and that's what I created Rockaway Riptides, which I call my coming-of-age story. And the promo is a tale for all times and all ages. And it is the story, my fictionalized story of my senior year in high school. And it was a turbulent time. And I reach out to anyone who has experienced the 1960s. I think you'll enjoy this book. You see the 1960s through the lives of teenagers who are in their senior year. And it's all about the kids. What glues them together is music, which when I remember the 60s, not only was there the chaos, but there was lovely, lovely music of all kinds. And that's what draws these kids together, music. And it's a fun book, but there's sadness because we experience sadness, deaths that happened. Some of the teenagers I went to school with, experienced the death of a parent. I put that in because I know that changes a kid's life. There's no question about it. If you are one of your parents dies when you're relatively young. And there's the Vietnam War, and the casualties of that war come and strike us at the high school. And then there's the other things that are happening on. So Rockaway refers to the Rockaways, which is a skinny peninsula jutting out of Long Island Sound. Although it's physically closer to Brooklyn, it's actually part of Queens. But it has always been fairly isolated. And so all the kids who lived in the Rockaways, and the peninsula isn't all that big, they all went to one high school. unless their parents decided to send them to a religious school, or if you want to sit on the subway for 2 hours each way to one of the city's special high schools. Otherwise, you went to Far Rockaway High School. And so you had all these kids, and it was pretty much the citadel in terms of what kids came to experience as teenagers. I dedicate the book to the alumni, staff, and faculty of Far Rockaway High School. I have a photograph which I took of the high school, and recently it is no longer a functioning high school, but the building, which was built in the 1920s, still stands. And it is the place where the kids sort of learn to get along with each other. And beside athletics, it was music that brought kids of various groups together. I mean, it was multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. We were all together in high school. And the 1960s was, the war was just starting, the Vietnam War. And so we start to see protests on the street. And I include those kinds of protests in the novel. Of course, the war is not finalized till 1973, but in the beginning, 1964, 1965 is the beginning where we start to, as Americans, start to see our boys go off overseas. And that's certainly very much a part of the story. And there's some of the racial stuff that was going on in the city. The Rockaways were separated, but was a dumping ground for many years for the New York City Housing Authority, built these huge projects in parts of the Rockaways. And eventually it became a racial divide, poor Blacks living in the public housing projects, and the middle class and people with more money being surrounded by these. And so there was some racial strife. And also I used the example, and this is a true example. We had a principal for years and years and years, a woman who came out of the 1930s Depression, an Irish spinster is that what we call, which was very common in the New York City public school system. They rise in the ranks, this woman becomes the principal, and then they push her out to make way for new people, white men, better educated than our original principal. And then we have a change. We have a change where the principal was once a member of the community. So she considers herself to be the mother of all of the students and the families. And we replace that with bureaucrats who care more about the system than they do about the students and their parents. And that begins all over the city. But I use this as an example here, where the Board of Education, the teachers and the teachers union goes to war against the parents and the students. And that very much happened in the Rockaways, because it happened all over New York City. And it was just a function of just the changes that were going on in the city and in the Rockaways. You couldn't get away from it. It was part of what was going on. And then on top of that, in 1965, John Lindsay gets elected mayor of New York. And he's a Republican. He's this extremely tall, handsome man from what we used to call the Silk Stocking District. He was a congressman from the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and he becomes our mayor. And again, there's all kinds of fighting that goes on with him and the unions and all kinds of other stuff. And so that's sort of reflected in the book, because not only do I remember it well, I actually, when I graduated college, went to work for the Lindsay administration. So I'm not unbiased in my regards towards John Lindsay. Some people have very, very negative attitudes towards him. I do not. I work for him. And when he was actually retired from New York City mayor, I not only left my job, I left the city and went to moving to Colorado. So that's how kind of disgusted I had been with what was going on. But my story is about kids. Because kids, they see things in a tunnel. They don't rarely see the big picture. And my students do not see the big picture. They see their own little lives, and they're caught up in their own little lives. And that's the thing about being young. When you're young, you just think you're going to live forever. And anybody over 30 is, as we used to think, was old. And the only thing that really kind of keeps us all together is the sense of music. I mean, we had the Beatles, we had the songs of the early 1960s. It was a phenomenal time, I think, for people who liked music. And I would later go on to become a music reviewer when I was in college. And so music continued to stay with me. And my main character is a kid named Cece, whose name is Cecilia Cohen, and everybody, even today, kids like nicknames, so that was the nicknames I put in there. Every kid basically has a nickname. There's the big C for Carmine. There's the Frankie for Franklin. I mean, we all have Petey. We're all using little nicknames, and that's the way I remember school. And so I've given, it is fictionalized, but it is certainly based on some real experiences that I had. And I've contacted many of my alumni from Far Rockaway High School to let them know I've written the book. I hope some of them will be inspired to go ahead and buy it and read it and love it, or disagree with it, because you can contact me and I'd love to hear from you. I've already heard from a number of my former classmates. They've contacted me, and we've had dialogues in it about the book, about life in the Rockaways. I know lots of times when kids grow up, they think that theirs is a special place. But I have to say, and it's trying to be not biased at all, that we had this incredible place that we grew up in. It was, the Rockaways were these 10 miles of beautiful public beaches, a wooden boardwalk, which was truly neglected by the city, but did manage to maintain itself. The ocean, we had barriers put up. We had stores, all these stores. The most favorite of mine is the Knish store in the Beach 30s. And I put it in the book because it's a place where the kids always went. And I used to go. And my mother and I would walk to the beach. We lived close enough to walk to the beach, walk on the boardwalk. It didn't matter what time of year it was. January through December, all summer, all spring, we would just love to walk on the boardwalk. And in off hours, we would ride our bicycles on the boardwalk. And it went on for miles and miles. And on top of that, we had this incredible playland, which is like a mini Coney Island, everything right there. And you didn't need a car. All you needed was a couple of pennies, and you can get on the Green Line bus and take you across the Rockaways. Public transportation into any place else was horrible. And, you'd get on the subway and it'd take you 2 hours to get to Manhattan. So that wasn't fun. But people who lived in the Rockaways, that's what they wanted. They didn't want to be on top of the city. You wanted to be away. You wanted to enjoy the water. You wanted to enjoy the boardwalk and the sun whenever it happened to come out. And that was the fun thing. And we would swim illegally, of course. In the evening, we would go swimming if it was in the heat of the summer. We used to have fireworks on Wednesday nights on the water there, so we could be on the boardwalk and watch the fireworks every Wednesday night during the summer. I mean, these were just classic things that we did. We would go to the playland, and it was just this fun mini Coney Island, a lot easier to get around, and it was, that made it kind of our little paradise. And then, of course, in the 1970s, into the 80s, until really much more recently, the place had deteriorated, and that boardwalk and that beach and everything was completely neglected. And there's been a gentrification, a revitalization of the Rockaways, but largely not by people who grew up there, largely by outsiders. And many of them are coming after 2012, when there was Superstorm Sandy. We here in Southeast Connecticut and Rhode Island felt it, but it was quite devastating in New York City. And the entire boardwalk was largely destroyed by Storm Sandy. But it has since been redone, and not redone in the wood that we remember, because wood deteriorates, but composite materials. And you can't sit under the boardwalk anymore. They've kind of made it so that you can't get underneath the boardwalk. Parts of it are now concrete. So it's a different place, but it has drawn in a whole bunch of people and money to build boutique hotels and housing of all kinds. And 2012 also did tremendous destruction to those huge public housing projects. So maybe, I don't know that it's happened, but maybe they'll just bring them down and replace them with something a lot nicer, a lot more beautiful than what has been there now. So that's my story. Here's my book. I know you got something there. And there's the boardwalk. I mean, it's the wooden benches and the wooden boardwalk. I mean, that's how we lived our lives. That's how we had meetings. We didn't have Zoom then, of course, so we would simply go on to the beach, have a hot dog and a knish, and talk about the world's problems, or basically, what happened to us yesterday. So, I mean, young minds don't, as I said, you don't think in the big picture. And my characters absolutely don't, because that's what happens when you're young. You want to enjoy that. So, any questions, or what do you think, Jimmy?
Well, you know, I have to say, I am fascinated by this, and I'm looking forward to reading the book, because I'm just a little younger than you. And so in the 60s, I was, 9, 10, 11 years old. And I was born in 59. So, and I grew up in a military family. So I was sort of, well, I guess, sheltered or whatever from the protest. What I heard from the military families and the military men were, those long-haired hippie pinkos. We saw news, we saw the Vietnam War go on every day, but of course we were more, pro-war. I mean, it was, hey, we have to fight communism. We have to, we were brainwashed that way. And it wasn't until I got older did I realize just how big the protests were, and, the civil rights movement and the protests against the Vietnam War. And of course, when I got a little older into middle school and stuff, then we started, realizing that, hey, we are the youth. This is, our parents weren't really right about a lot of this, or, that generation, they were brainwashing us. And then it seemed, I don't know, but it seemed like after I got out of high school, at the end of the 70s, 80s and 90s, everybody just sort of became more, I don't know, I don't want to say selfish, but more into themselves or whatever. It didn't seem like the world was really, fighting for all the injustice and stuff. Everybody was just out for themselves more of, And when you think about all the things that's happened since then and all the things that haven't changed, and now these protests are coming back. I still don't understand why, what we're doing in Afghanistan, but nobody seems to be organizing any sit downs or protests against that, but it's a fascinating time. And I want to go back and I want to see really what things were from a different perspective than I had when I was that age. And I think that anybody today, even the youth today, who are out protesting with the Black Lives Matter and trying to make the social changes that they're trying to make. Of course, they're doing it differently now through social media and stuff like that, but still, it doesn't seem. It seems like they should. I don't know. I think that people need to go back and really realize how it all started and where we all came from with this.
Well, my book discusses in the form of an event the anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy, and that begins really the turmoil of the 1960s. 1963, he is murdered, and that in our community, we have a lot of Irish, and he was a god. And even other people, my mother, my father, all of us, we just couldn't understand his assassination. And that is actually talked about in the book, because we used to have ceremonies to commemorate his assassination. Today, when November, I think it's November 23rd, I turn on and there's practically nothing about the Kennedy assassination. And I think back how traumatic. I mean, I could tell you to the second where and what I was doing when I was told about this news. I mean, and the parade and the what happened to him and what the country suffered through. Today, nobody talks about it. Well, my book talks about it because it was one of the most traumatic events of my life, not only my young life, but my life itself. Then we go on in 1964, Kennedy is gone and Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act, 1964. And then in 1965, which is the opening of my book, 1965, we get the Voting Rights Act. Now, the craziness is that that stuff is still not completely enacted. I mean, people, they're still trying to prevent Black people and other people from voting. But these were the days when we were hopeful, except for the war. The war was a terrible, terrible example of how it divided people. And the difference between people talking about the war, like you were saying about Afghanistan, is that young men were drafted during the 60s, so that today we have a voluntary army, but then we did not. And we had young men all trying to figure out a way not to go to Vietnam. And there were ways, there was George Bush the younger, he went to the reserves, I think the Air Force reserves. There were people who had a little bit of money or pressure or influence. They tried to get out of it. I had cousins who went to the reserves. My brother-in-law wasn't so lucky. He was a soldier in Vietnam, firing guns and probably breathing in napalm. So I mean, this is a war that we saw because people that we knew were involved. And my book, right head on, talks about the Vietnam War, the people who came back in body bags, and that was part of our young experience. And then trying to get our brothers and cousins and anybody we knew to get out of it. And all of a sudden you had a lot of kids, boys who went to college who absolutely weren't college material, but they didn't want to be shot. Their parents didn't want them to be shot and get killed. So, they tried very hard to keep them. Then we have the other thing that we have in the book is the teacher deferment. So all of a sudden the high school, it's got a lot of these young men who are our teachers because that's a deferment that gets them out of going to Vietnam. And so that's kind of a change in a school that had been run by Irish and mostly Irish spinsters. All of a sudden you got these young men who are teaching in the school. And that's also part of the history, and it's talked about there, because those are the kind of little things that happen. And the other stuff that happens is we have draft card burning. I have an event with that happening where the kids want publicity, so they burn their draft cards, and that again actually was against the law. I don't know how many kids were ever actually prosecuted for that event, but that's also part of my book. So it's not directly talked about in terms of civil rights, but the fact that our living was highly segregated, that I talk about, because the thing that brings Black and whites together is either athletics or music. And then we have other, minority groups that are there in the Rockaways. We have a number of people who are Chinese, and then when I talk about the ethnic as well as racial and religious disagreements, the Italians didn't get along with the Irish. The Irish and the Jews loved tragedy, so they saw themselves in each other's misery. The Italians and the Jews always sort of got along. And also embedded in there is the fact when I grew up, we were also, one of the power brokers in our community was the mafia. So I talk about, we have characters who represent that. And we live near, the one and only thing they really did quickly was they took Idlewild Airport, and after the assassination of John Kennedy, they named the airport after him. So John F. Kennedy Airport. We lived nearby, we were right over Jamaica Bay, and there was the airport. And that was a source of money and insurance scams and the mafia, all kind of tied up together. And I talk about that because that I know really well because my own family was involved with the airport and the mafia. So I have personal experiences with that one. And I put that in because there was the resentment against Italians in the Rockaways. Part of that was the people who knew what was going on at the airport. With what would you do was you would raid the airport and sell the stuff from the back of your car. I mean, it was like you see Goodfellas. Goodfellas as a movie was actually filmed in parts of the Rockaways. So yes. We grew up with that as well. So it's kind of a fun kind of mix of different kinds of people, and we basically didn't kill each other. So we let others do it.
Good point.
Yes, it is, and there is some sadness in there because there is death. Not only the death of some of the kids' parents, but also the death of some of the other people that are part of the scene. And I have had some cousins read the book, and so I've got generations of cousins and uncles and aunts who went to Far Rockaway High School, and they were trying to figure out, well, who was this person? And so, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, because I might have used someone as a composite. So they're a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I make them a character. The one thing that's truly mine in terms of the character Cece is that she and I were both musicians. I played the accordion, and then I later played the clarinet. And in the novel, Cece is a clarinetist. And she was good. She's good because I write her up as a good musician. I was a terrible musician. Nonetheless, I did play for years. My mother was quite insistent that I play. She thought I must have talent because her father had talent, but he skipped my generation. I didn't have talent, and my cousins were forced to play the piano, and none of them had any talent. So that one, we skipped a couple of generations. My daughter was talented, so there you go. It came back.
There you go.
There you go. She played the cello for many, many years. So,
well, we're winding down here. Believe it or not, this half hour is flowing by, but I'd like to ask you one question. Growing up when you were in high school, I mean, like you say, when you're young, I mean, everything is just what's coming up this day. You know, am I going to go to a party? Am I going to see my friends? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? But writing this book, how much do you think, or how do you think that your experiences in high school shaped your thinking now?
Well, it's a good question. It's a good question. I think back on a couple of things. One is that I was so fortunate. You know, I wasn't my decision making. I was so fortunate to grow up in this place that many people, you know, they grow up in a city and it's hot and sticky and all that stuff. And I had this gorgeous beach and boardwalk and ocean, and we had shops and people that we knew, and the community was all part of. We were all part of a larger community, and I think about that in terms of myself being involved with nonprofit organizations and doing charity work. That's a part of this idea of being part of a community, and I felt it very much when I was growing up. And somebody from my class sent me the actual via email the actual photograph of my 5th grade class with all the kids and my teacher. And I talk about a community. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Flork, went to the beauty parlor every week with my mother. I mean, I was there listening to the two ladies chit-chatting away. Sometimes I was part of the discussion. Many times I wasn't. So, I mean, that was growing up. You knew these people. They were in your community. They were in your church. You saw them in the stores. And that was a wonderful experience.
That is a wonderful way to grow up. And I'm very impressed. I can't wait to read the book. I think I would recommend this. I mean, I think everybody should think about, how their lives were shaped by the events of their days and times, and help them formulate, some really solid, like you say, helping in the community. We're all part of this together. And I think that's a beautiful message. So I want everybody to, everybody get yourself a copy of Rockaway Riptides. I'm gonna read it, and then we'll talk again.
Yeah,
I'm sure you'll be back again, Harriet. You're a proficient writer, and we're gonna keep going. So, but we're running out of time today. So I want to thank you so much for being on today. It was great. Can't wait to see you again. And for everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Books and Beyond with Jimmy Bennett and my guest, Harriet Grayson. Take care, be safe, stay healthy, and be wary of this COVID till it's over. Okay? A little while longer.
Thank you.
Vaccination, and hopefully we'll all get back to normal. Thank you very much. Take care.